Hello, everybody. This is Jonathan Oakes, and this is a Real Talk episode of Trivial Warfare. If you're familiar with this format, every once in a while when something meaningful happens and I want to share with you guys, I'll do a Real Talk. This is not a trivia game. It's not going to be a fun episode. We're going to be talking about what's happening in the U.S. right now in regards to protests and riots, what we've seen, just what we're thinking about that. And I say we because I'm joined by Ben Young. Hey, Ben.
Good evening.
Thanks for joining me, man. So before we get started, I just want to tell you guys, if you don't want your kids to listen to real talk about what's going on, this probably isn't an episode for kids. And will there be swearing? There will probably be swearing, but it's not after dark. So those are my caveats, and we're going to dig in. So, Ben, I asked you to do this. I appreciate you agreeing to it. I found myself this morning, after I'm not a big news person, right? And I try and avoid news, frankly. And I know that is seen as a privilege, and you're right, it is a privilege. And I've taken advantage of that privilege in a lot of different ways. I can't do that right now. I'm struggling mightily with that. And as I was bringing myself up to date on what was going on last night, what was happening, I found myself watching videos and obviously becoming really, really upset. And I felt the need to talk not just about it, but to get perspective. And I knew that I wanted your perspective in particular, out of the four of us who are the primary Trivial Warfare people. Obviously, you're African-American, so your opinion on what's happening, I think, is going to carry more weight than my opinion. And so I want to start just by mentioning a conversation we had on a chat message the other day, how you said to a group of us that even in your nice neighborhood that you moved into a couple of years ago, you're like, no, I really don't love the idea of taking a walk by myself in my own neighborhood. So I'm wondering if you could start there.
Yeah. So obviously there's a lot of folks reacting about the George Floyd situation and everything that's happening there. And we happen to be talking about it in our wrestling kind of Facebook Messenger group. And I was kind of explaining to y'all then that, and so again, I'm also not a big news person. I don't like to consume news that often. But this story has just become so massive that it's impossible to avoid. For me, I said, you know what, I don't want to belabor this point, but I wanted all of you to know how I feel about all of this. And I remember posting that, I want to walk through my neighborhood for exercise, but I legitimately don't feel comfortable doing that because I don't want to be hunted down and killed by a couple of yahoos. And that would probably sound crazy to people before the Ahmaud Arbery case happened.
Right.
It seems preposterous that someone who, bought a house, who pays taxes in his neighborhood, whose child in this case goes to school in the neighborhood, is afraid of walking through their own suburban neighborhood. I mean, I got the American dream, man. I got the suburban house in the cul-de-sac. My fence is white. It's not picket, but it's vinyl.
You worked hard for it.
I worked hard for it. Escaped the ghetto and drug infested neighborhoods and worked my way up to be able to have what I have today. And I'm very blessed. And I feel less safe walking down my own street in this American suburban neighborhood than I did in the crack infested neighborhoods when I was a kid. And it's not something that's new. I have felt this way for a few years now, just in light of events that have been happening where, if you are a black male, and you're in a neighborhood and people don't know who you are, you're automatically assumed to be a suspect. You're automatically a perp. That's just the default assumption when people see you and when they don't know you. So I used to like walk like around the actual neighborhood when I first moved in here. But then I started seeing reports in Jacksonville of just people getting stopped and frisked. And then I said, okay, well, I'm not going to walk. I'm going to try not to walk by actual houses. I'll just walk to the corner. And then because I live like one street off of a major thoroughfare. So I'll just walk to the corner, make a left and walk out to the major thoroughfare and then walk back. And then I started doing that. And then the Ahmaud Arbery case happened. And now I don't really even want to walk at all. I said, well, maybe if I walk with my daughter on a scooter, maybe people won't automatically think that I'm some type of perpetrator and kill me in the middle of the street. So that may be something that I may try, but I think it's important. Anyone who's listening to this, I think it's important to know this is my life every day. This is not something that's, that happens every time a major case happens, every time an unarmed black man gets killed in the street. It doesn't reignite this fear in me necessarily. This is how I live every day. When I walk into a store and I get looks by people to see if I'm there to steal something. I mean, that still happens today in 2020. That's not a concept that went away in the 70s or the 80s. That still happens to me all the time. And unfortunately, I've normalized a lot of that. I've come to anticipate and expect that that's just stereotype, that is a stereotype that a lot of people in this city have towards people who look like me. And I actually try to do things to lessen my appearance of being threatened so that I don't get shot and killed.
Like what?
It's like I'll always make sure my hands are visible. I never walk in the store with my hands in my pockets. If I'm wearing a hooded sweatshirt, I always take the hood off. I will say good morning to people in regular English to let them to give them a sense that I'm educated and that I'm not ignorant. I don't know whether these things actually are protecting me or not. But again, I'm 42 years old. I grew up in this, and these are just defense mechanisms that I've put together in my own mind that I do to keep from being perceived as a perpetrator.
Right.
So that's everyday life for me. And that's everyday life for a lot of black men in this country.
I was watching a video the other day, and it's a video I've seen before. There's an older white lady who would go to college campuses and do talks, and there's a clip of her asking a room full of white people, I want you to stand up if you would like to trade places with a black man in terms of how they're treated and how they're looked at and what people's assumptions are about them and all the rest of it. So if you've already stated you believe that people are treated equal and you believe in equality, if you would trade places with a black man right now, would you do that? And constantly nobody stands up, and she repaints it and she restates it and she does all, and it's just like, no, people don't stand up. And it's the fact that it has been normalized in your own heart. I think that for people on the white side of the fence, or the I guess I hate black and white, but we're probably going to use those terms just to make it easier. On the white side of the fence here, I think that it's been normalized there too, that, that sucks. And it's the way it is kind of thing. And I think that that's a really pointed piece of what's happening right now with the urgency and need to protest. As somebody who watched the video of George Floyd's murder, it's appalling. It's absolutely 100% appalling. And I think that it calls into this stark reality for people that this is what's happening. This is a real thing. When you see the lack of care on the person's face who's doing this crime, and you see this poor man surrounded by people who are supposed to be the people that we can go to for help. And for that to be seen as normal or not unexpected at all by the black community, there is a need to speak and to be heard and to force people to hear you. So if you could maybe talk about that a little bit, if you've seen the video, what you felt when you saw that video and what it's motivated in you.
I will honestly tell you that my motivation didn't come from what I saw in the video, really. And I'm just going to be really honest. What I saw in that video is the same thing that I've seen in every other video. I mean, in my lifetime, going back as far as Rodney King and for many decades before that, this issue of police brutality and the treatment of black people and black men in particular by police, it happens so frequently in our community that it's like people make jokes about it. It's been normalized. The Rodney King situation, that was 28 years ago.
Yeah.
And I think that there are a lot of people up until this week who felt that race relations between the police and black men have been showing improvement since Rodney King. And I am realizing with this reaction that people are coming to realization that it's not any different. Like nothing, in my mind, nothing really changed.
I don't think that anybody has thought it's been improving, honestly. I think that over the last 5 years or less, I think it's been called into the reality of people's minds that this is a bad situation and it seems to be getting worse. The number of people who you can name that were killed by policemen over the last 2 years is incredibly awful. Mm-hmm. And that's something at least I was ignorant to it until the last 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, and it's what I would say is I think that I agree with you. I think that there are, especially now in the last few days. I told Tashina when I started to see kind of the news reports that were coming out on ESPN on the tickers and the protests, and then yesterday morning, our Carrie Weems, who is the co-pastor of my church, Celebration Church, did a long post, I think it was on Twitter, about the outrage associated with this and that we need to stand together. We need to not we as white people, white Christians, should not be turning a blind eye or choosing not to comment because we're afraid to offend a few police officers.
Right.
So I think that, now I think that people are starting to see that this is really a problem. But up to this point, this is the first time that I felt like there was a consensus of outrage. Back when Samir Rice got killed, or when, the Atiana Jefferson got killed, there was a whole backlash, or, the stuff in Ferguson happened.
Yeah.
There was a Blue Lives Matter backlash. Kaepernick was completely destroyed in the media for kneeling. He was trying to peacefully lead a peaceful protest around brutality. He was shown, he was ostracized and mocked for being un-American. There was a whole debacle in the NFL about it. To this day, he still, hasn't been approached by teams, won a settlement against the NFL for basically wrongful business practices. So up until this point, there's always been this backlash that says, what about black on black crime? Why don't black folks get all up in the air when a black person gets killed by another black person? Why does it only go viral when it's a white person or a police officer? And I think this situation with George Floyd is the first time where you don't hear or see any of that backlash. And I don't know particularly what's different about this situation that caused, I don't know what's any more egregious about this situation than Tamir Rice or Atiana Jefferson or any of the other, dozens of black people in the last 30 years have been killed by police that went viral. But I do know that it is different. And I take some solace in knowing that there are enough people who are not black who are taking this seriously enough to where we can hopefully start to impact change. That's just the hope that I have.
I have the same hope. It makes me, you brought up Kaepernick, and I actually did want to talk about Kaepernick because as we see protests and violence coming out of protests, the side of the equation that you're talking about, the Blue Lives Matter group and the folks who push that agenda, the All Lives Matter agenda, as we look back at the Kaepernick thing, he actually, and I remember thinking this at the time, he's, by doing this peaceful protest, by approaching the military and saying, hey, I want to do something during the national anthem. What's the best way to do this? Or people in the military, at least.
Right.
What he did and what he tried to do on this topic of black men being killed, of police brutality, what he tried to do is exactly what people who I see now are saying black people should be doing. And that incenses me. It makes me so angry to see people who very strongly shared hatred towards Colin Kaepernick in the way that he was doing things. And now the things, well, they shouldn't be doing this. They shouldn't be doing that. They should find a way to do this peacefully without causing property damage or hurting anybody. And that's literally what you castigated this person for doing and cost him his job and made it a huge thing.
Yeah.
There's no pleasing this group of people on this topic. And I think that from the outside looking in and a little bit from the inside looking in, when I think about my family, I think that people are tired and people don't care anymore about worrying about what's going to please somebody else. It is time for change.
Yeah, I agree. So Dr. King talked about this. He's quoted as saying that perhaps the biggest threat to the civil rights movement wasn't white supremacy or the government or the paradigm. He felt that the biggest threat to the civil rights movement was the white moderate, because that was the majority at the time. We know back then and even now that there were people who were not of African American descent who were marching alongside black folks to fight for freedoms and civil liberties. And we know that back then and today, there are white folks who are white supremacists at the very least and racists just outright, that will never believe that black people deserve to be equal to and unified with white people. So we already know where those folks stand, but that's the margin. The majority is still the white moderate. And I think what you're seeing now in the last few days is I'm seeing a response from the white moderate in ways that I have never seen, which gives me hope that this outrage by the white moderate will start to move things forward. But, there's ignorant people of every gender, every race, every class. And there are just people who just choose to bury their heads in the sand and say, well, wait a minute. You're now threatening my safety by doing all this rioting. Why are you doing this? Why can't you do this more peacefully? Well, we've been doing this peacefully for 100 years. And black men are still being murdered by police. When you thought about that, it made me think about an interview that Tupac Shakur did, where he was talking about racial tensions and things that were happening in the early 90s. And they were asking, well, why do we see all these riots breaking out and all this racial tension happening? He said, basically, I'm going to paraphrase him. He basically said, black folks have been asking ever since, slavery ended. Black folks have been asking, for over 100 years, been protesting, marching on Washington, Selma, Montgomery. We've been asking to get a seat at the table. We've been asking to be treated equally and fairly, and we continue to be denied. And there's going to be a time where we're just going to stop asking. Now he was far more militant than I am in terms of that, but I mean, he makes a good point in that, you know, there is a crucible that has been kind of boiling over about this for a while, and it's only going to get worse the more that this happens. It's only going to escalate from here.
And I think that that's a big reason why I wanted to talk about it, because I see things getting worse, not better. And I know that you're talking about having hope, and right now I'm struggling with trying to find hope, because one of the things that I shared this morning from that roundup of stuff I was looking at last night is the videos of the way that police handled themselves overnight last night. And it is disturbing. It is disturbing. If you go to my Facebook page, you'll see some of the videos I'm talking about, and you'll see that, like, there's it's like a 2.5 minute video. There's a piece where 3 policemen are walking behind a black woman. It's obviously at night, so it's curfew, and they're trying to move people. They're trying to get people to go home or to leave. But she's walking away from them. You don't see any argument or anything like that. She's not even looking at them. And one of them just flicks his wrist and pepper sprays her in the back of the head, just out of the blue, right?
Yeah.
She wasn't doing anything. She wasn't even protesting at that point. She was trying to comply. I saw policemen antagonizing people who were following their instructions, and then like a policeman ran up on somebody who was questioning and pushes them down, and then it escalates from there. I see policemen ignoring common human decency of dealing with people and aggressively making the situation worse. You have press people who are holding up their press credentials and yelling, "Press, press, press," being forced down, and then once again laying on the ground and getting pepper sprayed while they're on the ground doing nothing. Why are you pepper spraying somebody who's not a threat, who's not doing anything to you? Yeah. Right? That kind of, you see, there's a video of either police or National Guard going through down a suburban, it felt like, street in a city. It probably wasn't suburban, but it was homes. And there were people who were basically at their front door, at their home, on their porch, who were watching and videoing these people, and they were yelling at them, "Get inside, get inside." And then one of the guys says, "Light them up." And they start shooting gas canisters and rubber bullets at them on their own porch, at their own home.
Yep.
The behavior that I'm describing is obscene to me. It's not, I'm not going to say it's the most upsetting thing, because the George Floyd video is much more upsetting. But the realization for me this morning, as I cried watching this video, in my heart, of seeing policemen actively embracing this role of being the bad guy, because that's what I'm looking at.
Right.
I'm looking at people who are not treating humans like humans. That doesn't end well for any of us. If the police force, and I know this sounds silly from the black perspective, because this is what you're saying you've been dealing with. If the police can't be the good guys, then you've got a real problem with a societal breakdown about to happen. You need policemen to be the good guys.
Yeah.
And I know, so from your perspective, what does that bring up in you?
That they're just acting how they always act. That this isn't anything new. Trevor Noah made a couple years back, the host of The Daily Show. He talked about how police, because he's from South Africa, and he said that police are militarized in the United States in ways that they're not in other countries. He talked about in South Africa, he was riding with a friend and there was a police car in front of him. And the police car, I guess he wasn't paying attention and had drifted over into his lane. So he kind of just tapped his horn to notify the police officer he was in his lane. And his friend, who was American, was like, dude, you can't do that. That's the police. He was like, dude, what are you talking about? He was in my lane. I just honked him to go over. But I mean, we know that, there's good odds that if he had done that in the United States, it probably would not have gone the same way, because police are just militarized here. It's the government makes it easy for police officers to treat people in an inhumane way, if they have probable cause or just cause to do so. I remember joking to my friends years ago. We were talking about police and the Sixth Amendment and the police being able to search a vehicle, and it's like, well, police technically can't really search a vehicle unless they have probable cause.
Like,
but I'm black. But I'm black.
Yeah.
So if you're a black man, the police have probable cause, and you could take it to court and sue them if you want, but the jury and the judge is going to agree with them, because that's how our system is set up. It's a corrupt system.
Yeah.
It always had. That's how it's always been. But the reason why I say that I have hope is because I have never before seen an outpouring of support from non-black communities that I have seen here. And what my hope is that if there is more of a consensus that is putting this on display, and it's not just, it's not just posing crybaby black folks that are whining about somebody, a criminal getting shot down in the street, but that it actually is, people who have privilege and people who have political and economic power that join forces and join the cause that says this has to change, and it has to change now. I'm hopeful that we can actually start to see movement in terms of changing the way that police behave, and what is more difficult, in my opinion, is changing the way that black men are perceived, from a stereotypical standpoint. That's a lot harder. But again, I try just to avoid police. I always have, all of my life, because I know that. I was watching a show a few years ago called 60 Days In. Mm-hmm. And for those not familiar, this is a reality show about ordinary citizens that they go into jails, and they take on the perception. My brain isn't working today. They basically are taking on the identity of a criminal.
Yeah.
And so they're going into these jails, and they have hidden cameras, and they want to show you what it's like on the inside. And I remember one of the exchanges that the head officer that was leading kind of this whole program, he was talking to one of the inmates that was undercover, and I don't remember what the discussion was, but he said, well, I'm just trying to get along with this person. I'm just trying to make sure this person's okay. I guess he got into a conflict where they thought that he might have been siding with one of the other inmates on a conflict that happened. And the police officer said, this is not a person. This is an inmate. And I thought that was really telling. Mm-hmm. for him to say, and for them not to edit out the fact that he actually called a human being less than a person,
right? Because
they were an inmate in jail,
right?
So that's, you have to understand, that's and apparently from the videos you posted, I haven't seen, but from everything that we've seen and how this situation is not limited to the South. You have Atiana Jefferson, she was in Fort Worth, Texas.
Yeah.
This particular situation happened in Minnesota.
Yeah.
You had Philando Castile got gunned down in Wisconsin. This is a nationwide. It's happening all over the country.
That's a thing I wanted to bring up, because it is. I guess I'm naive, and it won't be the first time I'm naive, but I've always felt like this was a Southern thing. Like I've been led to believe by friends in the North that the racial relations are not as strained and not as much of a struggle in the northern states. So for these things to be happening in a place like Minnesota is stunning to me.
Yeah.
I guess that's complete naivety.
I would say this, because these we're talking about, and I want to make sure we don't conflate these situations. So the conversation you wanted me to talk about was about police brutality, right? And that's what we're talking about. But it was prompted by a comment that I made about not being able to walk in my neighborhood, and that was really that was the Ahmaud Arbery thing.
And that wasn't police. That was two people in the neighborhood.
It was two people in the neighborhood. Right. So they're related, and both those things have roots in the same things. But I want to make sure that we are defining those as two separate issues that are happening at the same time here, because they have different solutions, right?
Right.
So in terms of race relations, I would say that if I were living in a suburb of, Chicago, Detroit, Minneapolis, it's less likely that something like an Ahmaud Arbery is going to happen in a place like that, because I believe that there is probably less of a stereotype of black men being dangerous in suburban neighborhoods there than here. Probably. I could be wrong. That's how I feel. I don't have any facts or stats.
Well, not if you're on the south side of Chicago. You have the reputation of every black person being dangerous there.
Well, sure, so that leads into what I was going to say next, which is I've never been in law enforcement, but if I were a policeman and I was going to the south side of Chicago to do anything, my radar is already up, because I'm already going to feel like my life is in danger.
Right.
So therefore, for me, it's easier for me to comprehend how a police officer that's entering a neighborhood where they perceive to be dangerous, or where they know that they are not liked or they are considered hostile. It's easier for me to comprehend how a police officer that has weapons entering a hostile environment could justify in their minds putting aside treating people humanely for the sake of enforcing the law and keeping themselves safe. I could see where a policeman could justify them, or you have a culture of policing.
Right. You're using intimidation to help you affect success as opposed to keeping in terms of keeping yourself alive.
Right. It's indoctrinated in their training to use these as tactics to enforce the law and to keep themselves safe. It's easier for me to comprehend that, right?
Yeah.
But the thing is, if it's in this country, you see a lot of black people in one place. In most places in the country, that means poverty to people. And that's an equation that people make a lot. That's a stereotype that people make.
Right.
So if you're entering anywhere where there's a lot of black people grouped together, and you've made that equation of stereotype in your mind over and over and over and over and over again in your profession, then it's not difficult to see how a person who has that mindset could think that they're automatically in danger just because they're around a bunch of black people, right? Or that any individual black person is potentially dangerous because every time I've encountered a black person, 9 out of the last 10 times has been in a dangerous situation. It's easy for me to see how that could happen, because for me, I have to be able to reconcile in my mind what the root cause is. And that's the only thing that I'm landing on.
Some of my most vivid memories of my life come being fully engaged with the black community, being in the black church environment, where you're surrounded as a white dude. So you and one other white dude will be in a black church, right?
Right.
And you're surrounded by 300 or 400, 500 black people or more. And the absolute difference in that environment and in those personal relationships, and that thing where, as a white person, where I was a minority, and the ability to see black people engage with each other and treat each other with love, and just to see that from the inside, for lack of a better word, that altered my entire perspective on race. Mm-hmm. As a white person who didn't have, I mean, I've had my experiences with race growing up in the South and going to high school where there was constant violence and constant fighting. And so I grew up in an area, or at least in a high school environment where there was a fight a week at least, you know? Mm-hmm. And a lot of time it was typically a situation where it seemed like black kids were more often than not involved in that. And so I grew up with this feeling of, okay, black is dangerous. Mm-hmm. That was something that I experienced.
Yeah.
And it was a paradigm shift for me to be a part of a community of black people where I learned that when black people let their hair down and are just spending time with each other in not a risky situation, but just an at-home situation, they're amazing. They're the best.
Of course.
Black people are more fun than white people in general. If I can be in a room full of black people having a good time or a room full of white people having a good time, I probably want to hang out with the black people because they are more fun. It is. I'm not even. It sounds funny, but it's not a joke. It's real, and it helped me to start realizing and seeing my own prejudices and seeing my own view of this and how that all kind of turned about. But I don't think that most people have that experience. I think that I still struggle with that, like the south side of Chicago situation, where it's like, okay, in this place, black means dangerous. Mm-hmm. And there are people who are black who are dangerous. Right? It's not that everybody is good.
Right.
But the idea that there are a higher percentage of black men who are dangerous as opposed to the percentage of white men who are dangerous, I don't know that that's I mean, I don't have the stats in front of me, but I'm not under the impression that that's true. But we just have this stereotype.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm with you, and I'm happy that you had the opportunity to spend time with people who look different from you, because you can only grow. That can only help you as a person to spend a significant amount of time with people who do not look like you. Mm-hmm. You can only grow as a person by doing that. But I mean, most people are not like you. They are you're a half Mexican, but most white folks don't grow up like that. They're not thrust into or willingly take an opportunity as in their formative years to be around people who look different. Most white people grow up in neighborhoods that are mostly white. And so, they don't think twice about what that means, and it's kind of like we talked about this before on another podcast that didn't get published, but I said, can you imagine waking up tomorrow morning and if let's say you live in a quote unquote nice neighborhood, you wake up tomorrow morning and 90% of your neighborhood is black families, right? And all of the areas that are considered to be rough, 90% of the people who live there are white people and white families. Mm-hmm. And when there's a violent crime committed, 90% of the faces that you see on the news are white faces, right? The overwhelming majority of your politicians, your government officials, your teachers are black people, right? Most of your police are black people, and you're a white person and you're growing up and you go to a grocery store in your suburban neighborhood and everyone working in the grocery store is black. Like, how would you feel about that? Would you feel any different walking into your local Publix when there was all black people working there than how it is today?
Any white person who says they wouldn't feel different is either ignorant or lying.
Yeah, of course.
Everything would be different.
Right. With or without the stereotypes, and whether you want to carry the stereotypes of what you individually think about black people, or just the fact that you're the only person who looks like you in that place, you're going to be uncomfortable just, just off of that. But most white people don't. Most white people never experience being a minority in situations like that.
Yeah.
But black folks, we live in that every single day.
Yeah.
I am the only black person in Publix all the time. In fact, it's odd when I see another black person say, "Hey, there's another brother in the store. What's up, man?" It's unusual.
Right.
I used to play, Magic the Gathering. I would go to these midnight tournaments, and there'd be 100 guys in this room, and I'd be the only black guy.
Yeah.
Out of 100 dudes, but that's just my life. And sometimes I forget that I'm like the only black dude. Like, funny story I like to share all the time is when Tashina and I were dating, we lived near Murray Hill, and she wanted to go to church. So we went to Murray Hill Baptist Church. And at the time, Murray Hill Baptist Church was probably 150, 200 people. And not only were almost all of them white, but almost all of them were 60 years of age and over. Right.
My parents were probably there that day. I went to high school. Murray Hill Baptist Church was my high school church.
Oh, okay. So it's quite possible they were there. Now again, they treated us great, very nice. We had a great experience.
Oh, they're nice old people. They're trying to get younger.
They're great.
Yeah.
They're great. I think they're getting a lot younger now.
Yeah.
Things have changed since then. But Tashina was like, "How did they know we were visitors?" Like, Tashina, really? Look around. Like, she's surprised when we meet people once they remember our names. Like, we're the only black people there, Tashina. There, of course, they're going to remember our names. We stood out.
One of the more disturbing trends that I've started to see videos of lately, and the advent of video is maybe the defining change to all of this, because it's evidence. It's not rumor anymore, A set of videos that I'm seeing more and more now that are really disturbing when you talk about suburbs is situations where a black delivery person, like somebody delivering food or delivering packages, will get accosted, like they go in a gated community because somebody ordered a pizza or somebody ordered something on DoorDash, and they get accosted. Like, people, like, you'll see videos of people like old white men blocking their cars in so the black person can't do their job and go to the next house to deliver their pizzas.
Right.
And it's this very clear, obvious, hey, you don't belong in this neighborhood kind of thing. This assumption that you must be up to no good. Mm-hmm. Just seeing that happen once is shocking. Like, holy shit, what kind of backwards ass place is that? Right. But to see 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 different videos where that's happening, that is appalling. That is a piece of this. Mm-hmm. Because there's way too many people who literally assume you have to be up to no good if you have dark skin.
Yep. Yeah. That's the default stereotype.
What's really, I posted something today on Twitter. I mentioned that I never thought that doing the things that I was taught in elementary school, things like, remember the Pledge of Allegiance? Mm-hmm. It ends with liberty and justice for all. That's the last sentence in there. Mm-hmm. Our one of our oldest documents says we believe that all men are created equal, right? Mm-hmm. How is it that the people who grew up on those messages and said, you know what, that's true, I'm down with that. That's a belief structure that the adults are teaching us this, we're embracing this. Liberty, justice, equality. Mm-hmm. Now that makes you a radical.
Well,
I don't understand.
What's ironic about that is it's important for us to remember that, we talk about the founding fathers and they're always pictured as being these heroes and these demigods that helped us form the nation. We have to remember that they were fighting for their freedoms, but they were not fighting for the freedoms of the slaves that some of them
absolutely. Absolutely.
That's a huge dichotomy. Which is why, beating the drum about America America ain't never really been a great place for black people to be.
But the hypocrisy of the baby boomer generation, just to point a finger, because that's my parents' generation.
Sure.
The sheer hypocrisy in this like Generation X and the Generation Y and the millennials and all these other groups of younger people were raised on this idea. Mm-hmm. And we had the audacity to believe it. Mm-hmm. And the hypocrisy that our older generations typically don't seem to believe that or don't act in accordance with the idea that people should be treated equally. It's one of the things that gets my blood up so quick.
Well, yeah, because black people aren't a people to them, to those people. It's a different class of citizen to folks. And that's something that some of those folks actually believe, and it's been passed down. I mean, why else in the world would you not allow black people to use the same bathrooms as white people?
Yeah.
Unless you felt that they were a different class of citizen than you, right? Like the idea of that has been perpetrated. You know, even some of the abolitionists who were vehemently fighting for the freedom of the slaves didn't believe that they necessarily should be equal citizens to, you know, other white folks, to white folks. They still believe that they will have to be relegated to a lower class because that would just be their destiny. But at least they'd be free, right? So yeah, there is hypocrisy smeared across the tapestry of American history. So to me, it's not surprising that people would just continue to live out that hypocrisy because, yeah, all men are created equal, but we always knew that there was an exception for black folks. There always has been. We know the Constitution refers to African Americans as other persons. They wanted to make sure that we are excluding this particular group of humans who were not actually human. You know, we weren't actually considered humans until, you know, what is it, 14th Amendment or 13th Amendment? So when we were cattle, basically, we didn't have human rights. We were human beings without human rights until the 13th Amendment. So and it's weird when you think about it like that, because that's not how it's portrayed to us when we grow up and we do these history lessons. But that's the truth.
It is the truth. And even if it's not intentional, anyone who holds on to that, in fact, if you're a listener and you've made it this far and that's you, and you're not on board with any of this, with the quality where people are treated the same, you can get the hell out. I don't want listeners or money from listeners or downloads or anything else from people who aren't on board with everybody getting treated the same and people not having to live in fear of their life if they decide to go to work or to go birding or to jog in their neighborhood. If you want to support that support the idea that people should be afraid of that, then get the hell out of here.
Yeah. You know, obviously I agree with you. But again, this is nothing new for me or for people or for black people in general.
Yeah.
We've been living under this for a long time, and there's been a lot of effort over the years to right this wrong. And this is just the latest installment of the effort to right that wrong.
Speaking of things that are new, though, have you seen the reports on the different groups of young white men who are doing the vandalism and breaking windows and looting stores during this time?
I have not seen that.
So apparently, what I'm saying, I've seen multiple videos of black protesters literally screaming at young white men who you see breaking the windows or going into the stores and looting them. And there's the black protesters are screaming at them that what you're doing has nothing to do with this protest. What you're doing is damaging what we're trying to do. Mm-hmm. And from what I've read, and I haven't done any personal detailed research on it, so I'm going by what I've heard people who I respect say. Apparently, there is an alt-right effort to intentionally engage in these activities during these protests. Mm-hmm. And strategically, what that does is gets pinned on the black people that are protesting and make it look like black people can't get together without being criminal and looting your stores. Now, obviously, I'm not painting with a broad brush saying, "Hey, everybody who's looting is a white person," because that's not true. I've seen plenty of videos of black people looting or standing on cars or whatever. But the number of videos I'm seeing of young white men doing this, that is an accelerant in a way that intentionally creates disharmony and strife, and intentionally leads to lengthening this conflict and making it worse. And it is the most disturbing thing yet.
Yeah, I would honestly tell you, there's no way that we could prove or disprove whether that is an intentional act by the alt-right. But I will certainly tell you that if something like that were happening, it wouldn't surprise me. I mean, that wouldn't exactly be the first time that, black folks were smeared in conspiracy. America was in denial about the crack epidemic for over 20 years. Black people have been saying that, because it happened all of a sudden. It's not like a wave that kind of just gradually grew. Like suddenly, crack was just everywhere, all over the inner cities, and people were dying, and it was just a whole epidemic. And black people have been saying, look, this was something that was specifically orchestrated by the government for all sorts of reasons, right? People the white moderate kind of turned the other way for 25 years. Now we've got Netflix series about it. So now everybody's like, oh, yeah, that makes perfect sense. Well, hey, we've been telling you since the 80s that the government, that was the CIA was, basically aiding and abetting the drugs being moved into the United States because they were trying to raise funding for some type of coup or some type of government thing they're trying to do in Central America. And so they negotiated with sorry, Tashina was like going ham in the living room. I don't know what's going on in there. Like, what is happening? But yeah, so basically they negotiated with these drug dealers to flood crack through the inner cities, and that's kind of how the crack epidemic started. It was perpetuated by the CIA. That all of that is, I guess, the documents are declassified, and that's it's open knowledge now, but back then it was just, nope, it's just these black gangsters destroying their cities. So we're going to have the DARE campaign and just say no and do all this mass incarceration to clean up the streets. Yeah. That we the government made dirty in the first place. So yeah, so to answer your question, it really wouldn't surprise me if that were the case. But economically there's a lot of people and a lot of lobbyists and a lot of church leaders who just have a lot at stake to make sure that the narrative that black people are bad continues to move forward. There's a lot at stake. And part of the hope that I was talking about earlier is a lot of those white moderate folks that kind of just remain silent and allowed that narrative to move forward are now becoming more vocal and now are saying, no, we're not going to stand by. Because look, when Ahmaud Arbery got gunned down 60 miles from here, nobody in my church said anything. There was no discussion. There was no outrage. When Atiana Jefferson got gunned down in Fort Worth 6 months ago, nobody said anything. There was nothing by my church said anything. But you better believe this Sunday they said all three of those names by name. The lead pastor of my location, and then our senior pastor were doing a joint sermon, and they brought up Arbery, Atiana Jefferson, and George Floyd by name during their sermon today. So it's like, I'm not gonna throw shade or anything like that. I'll just say I'm instead of me saying where was all this outrage 50 years ago, and why are all of you in these and a lot of these Christian organizations in the South continuing to turn a blind eye and have counter narratives for this. I could say, well, why now? Why all of a sudden y'all decide you want to be outraged? But I'm just not taking that path. I'm saying, welcome to the movement, welcome to the revolution. I hope that the consensus that's building around this will cause us to really forward change. But I do agree with you that I think that things are going to get worse before they get better, because they're the ugly underbottom of this is just beginning to be seen, and the implications are far-reaching. You're talking about essentially trying to completely shift the paradigm of how we police people in the United States. Yeah. That's not a small feat.
Well, with a president who's not interested in it either.
Well, exactly.
Who's exactly. Not even not just not interested, but is literally like pushing in the other direction.
Well, it's the same thing. It's sending the National Guard. We've been National Guard has been harassing people for 100 years, right? That's always the default when black people get unruly. They're sending the National Guard, and now we're using pepper spray. In the 60s, it was spraying them with water hoses. So it's but I think it's important for people to kind of see, because you don't want to be on the wrong side of history on something like this. This is monumental. There's people will be talking about this, 50 years from now.
Yeah, you've got good and you've got not good. You got good. It's good right. And evil.
Right.
It's treating people with love. It's treating people with respect. It's treating people as humans.
Right.
Versus not.
Yeah, and so I want to comment quickly about the looting. So for me, I feel like whenever there's a situation like this, everyone involved are basically in, I'll call it 4 groups. You have a group of people who are not protesting, who are just kind of watching what's happening, right? Which I'm actually in that group. I haven't done any active protesting in the streets. Then you have the group of people that's leading the peaceful protest, that's organizing. They have signs, they're doing things, but they have no intention to do any harm to anything or anyone, right? You have those group of people.
Providing instructions to people, telling them do not do these things.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's the majority of people involved in this. Then you have people who feel like they're so enraged and incensed, right? And they choose a non-productive means of expressing their rage by causing violence, right? You have that group of people.
Yeah.
And then you have the opportunists. You have people that realize that, okay, now that there's mass hysteria happening, now this is a chance for me to go and loot some buildings and crack open a safe, or because, police presence is going to be spread too thin. So now I get a chance to kind of run amok and take advantage. And the unfortunate thing that always happens is that we loop all of those people into one group.
Yeah.
It's important for us to realize that you have protesters, you have a small group of people who are incensed and are causing violence, which I do not condone, but they are expressing their rage in a non-productive way. And then you have a much larger group of people than them that are the opportunists that are actually doing the bulk of the looting and causing the destruction. So
and what's really disturbing about it is that last group, they make the peaceful protesters who are out there trying to affect change, trying to accomplish something. Every single opportunist negates that message.
Agreed.
It makes it so easy for people to not focus on the key issue and instead focus on this thing that they're seeing, whether it's vandalism or arson or looting.
Right.
And if you're given an option to look at something that's not the primary and it fits with your narrative, then you're not going to see it. You're not going to change. You're not going to help.
Right. Yep. Yeah. It's, again, this is a normal part of my life. These things that are coming to fruition for the rest of America, these are things that I've known about the police. I've known that the police are capable of doing this because I've seen it with my own eyes, and I've lived through it and I've experienced it. And I have hope that we can finally start to bring about change. And that's all I really can do.
Yeah. All right, man. Well, I think that's probably a good place to wrap it up here.
Yep.
From me to you, I want you to know that I love you. I've been thinking about you, and out for all of our listeners who are engaged in protests, be safe, We want you to be healthy. We want you to get your message across, and we want you to be well. And to all of our listeners of any kind of minority, but especially to our Black listeners, we love you, and we're with you. This is important to us.
Absolutely.
All right, Ben. Thanks for getting on with me, man. I will talk to you later,
all right,
okay?
Thanks. All right, see you.
All right, bye.